Hi, my name is Jordy Izzard. I'm Associate Director of Alumni Relations at SAIS, and I'm here today on April 23rd, 2014, with Sibyl and Erdman and with Richard Erdman, who graduated from SAIS Bologna in 1971 and had previously been a year in Washington, D.C. And Sibyl, as we will find out, worked at SAIS for a long time with Dean Wilcox and in Bologna as well. So thanks so much for your time today, and we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation. So let's start with maybe what originally brought you to SAIS, and you can both answer, whoever wants to start.
Well, you went first, so you went.
Oh, I did go first. I went in 1968. And I went very much the same way Betty Beecham did, in that I was unhappy with my job in Washington, having just moved down from Boston. And I went to an employment agency, and they said there's this job at SAIS. I had been working at Harvard Business School, and I loved the academic atmosphere. So I thought, well, this is what I'll do then. And it was with Dean Wilcox, and I started out being his secretary and ended up being in alumni relations, and kind of not alumni, but the student
Affairs?
faculty liaison person. And so I really enjoyed my job there tremendously. And
so much
worked
like
there
Bonnie.
until yes, and worked there until my dear friend Janet Fessler, who was in your position. She and I decided we would take an adventure and we would just go to Europe. And we went to Europe, and she ended up being asked to be the registrar of the Bologna Center because the woman was on leave. And I said, well, we agreed to stay together, so I'll go. And I worked in the library and typed papers and taught English and did all sorts of things. So it was a wonderful year in Bologna.
That's great.
Probably the best.
And they ended up there quite independently.
Right,
Me
of
going
him.
there. It just so happened, because they started out in Rome, and then Janet was offered the registrar job, which opened suddenly. But what it meant was that when I ended up coming there, we had a wonderful pre-marriage honeymoon of traveling all around Italy.
Yeah, we used to stuff our
My
car with
we had a new
everybody.
car that I had
all the
purchased.
roommates, all the friends, and
So
a
it was
tiny
fun.
car.
And what was your favorite place?
Florence.
Wow.
How could it
Florence.
not be Florence? Yeah.
But Siena we liked. I mean,
Oh,
Amalfi
everything.
Drive, that was in the days before it was jammed with tourists.
Yeah.
That's great. And what originally brought you to SAIS?
Well, I had known from a very early age I wanted to go into the diplomatic service, and I was at Princeton, and I knew I wanted to also go into the Peace Corps before going into the service, and I also wanted graduate work. And at Princeton, it all goes back to the Wilsons, because Ed Wilson was the brother of my closest friend at Princeton, Ken Wilson, and Ed was going off to graduate school at SAIS. And so when I was finishing my Peace Corps time in Turkey, which was a pivotal decision, not by me, but by the Peace Corps sending me there, because it affected the rest of my career, I applied to SAIS, and SAIS and Fletcher, but I got a full scholarship at SAIS, so that was very, very nice.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And then let's talk a little bit about, and some of this will end up merging, but let's start with you, Richard, and talking about when you were at SAIS as a student, first in Washington. This is before you guys met. Tell us what it was like to be a student there.
It was great. I mean, I'm a pretty diligent student. What I found actually was, in retrospect, I think I was having a little culture shock, re-entry culture shock from the Peace Corps in Turkey, which was just a fabulous experience. And I had started out in Near Eastern Studies because of the Turkish angle, but then I decided that I wanted to do the second year in Bologna. That had not been my original intention, so I switched to European Studies, which was not much of a switch since I had done that. I majored in history in Princeton with a lot of emphasis on European Studies. So it was a good year, and wonderful courses, and I think it's put me in very good stead in terms of my building of my intellectual capital. And then, and I met Sibyl, but I was poverty-stricken, so we only had one date.
No, I think we had
2
a couple
days.
more than that.
That's great. And then, and what else was maybe historically happening at the time? Do you remember?
Oh, I remember very definitely. I was doing a paper and studying, and this was in 1969, and Gaddafi overthrew King Idris in Libya. I remember sitting at my desk and hearing this. So that I do remember that.
Absolutely.
I remember you and many others donning your suits and going down to Capitol Hill to protest Vietnam.
The bombings of secret bombings of Cambodia. That was
I mean the whole thing. Yeah. So, the SDS was around, and I don't recall the really nice guy's name who was the head of the SDS, and also Vietnam. So there was a lot of action going on at that time.
And then when you went to Bologna as a student, and there you met Sibyl, what was the Bologna Center like? You guys can...
Fabulous.
What's that?
Fabulous.
Fabulous,
Yeah.
yes. In a
I
word.
think back academically, it was not on the same level as the caliber of the teachers at the Washington branch. But again, it was education in the very broadest sense, not just academically, but which I worked very hard there as well. But for us, because we were traveling every weekend, going to different places, it really was education for life because it affected our tastes in music, in art, in architecture, just traveling to all the wonderful Renaissance cities there, and just the colors of Tuscany. So food, music, architecture, art. It was a true education. True education. It wasn't just
very
strictly
broad.
academically.
In fact, it was
Right.
much more about the experience.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah.
It really was.
What do you remember about it?
Well, I loved going to Mancini's course and sitting in on several courses.
And Pierre Hasner also?
Pierre Hasner, yes. And just enjoyed very much the atmosphere of Bologna. I did teach English outside as well as at I really didn't do it. We did it for the the Italian American Association, which was down in the basement of the Bologna Center. But I just remember the students were quite close. It was a very good group of students, and I think people just were enjoying both the academic life and certainly being in Italy, because it is a pretty fabulous country. Yeah.
And at that time, were there quite a few Italians who attended, or was it more international students?
No, I remember possibly 3 or 4 Italians, Germans, Austrians. I don't remember any French, but basically European.
Yeah, at least
I
one
think
English.
there were a couple of Middle Eastern fellows, mainly men from Europe.
And then tell us when you graduated from SAIS, and did you continue to work, or tell us kind of how...
back and I worked for Franny, Dean Wilcox again, and then we were married in September.
We got engaged while we were in
Bologna.
And,
And I worked for him until September.
So you all moved back to Washington.
Moved back briefly to Washington.
Because I had
He
already
entered
been
the Foreign
accepted in the
Service.
Foreign Service, so we finished school like in May and
Right.
traveled. And
With
I
another
knew I was
couple.
joining the Foreign Service,
Yeah.
but I wanted Sibyl to go to Turkey with me to where I'd been in the Peace Corps, since it was a very important part of my life. So we took a
would never
nice
get back
trip
there
with
again.
two other SAIS, another SAIS couple, Jack
Right.
Knott and Vicky Knott, and they had a nice car, so we put in the ferry and went from Ancona to Greece, and then we, on our own, I guess we went to Turkey.
We went to Turkey with another couple.
And we went all around and went back to my Peace Corps village, and I said, and I wanted to introduce them to Sibyl, and I said, we'll try to be back in 3 or 5 years. Well, as it turned out, we came back, I entered the Foreign Service in June,
And that's where you
and in
went?
July, I found out that I had been assigned to go back to Turkey, because I came in with very fluent
great.
Turkish.
Meanwhile, the car is
And-
coming from Italy to Baltimore, back to Turkey.
So our car never made it here, out of the
No.
harbor in Baltimore. So that's why the Turkey was very formative in my life.
Right. And then we came back from Turkey, and I actually
How long
went
were you there?
back
Like
2 years.
Okay.
2 wonderful years. And I came back, and I was pregnant with our daughter, who turned 40 last week.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for Reardon Roet as his secretary until she was born.
Oh, excellent.
So, yeah, and that was the end of SAIS for me, but it was really a wonderful experience.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did you see him at the Legacy
I
lunch?
did.
Yeah.
It's the first time I had seen him for many, many, many a year, but, he hardly has changed, and,
That's great.
it was great fun to see him.
Do you know Anne McKenzie, who works with him now?
No.
Yeah,
no,
she's fabulous. You guys
no.
get along really well.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
And so tell us more about then. You guys left Turkey. You came back to Washington for a time. And how did your career then evolve?
Well, to make it in summary form, and I keep coming back to the theme of how important Turkey was, because I not only came away from the experience in the Peace Corps with fluent Turkish, but I came away fairly well read in Turkish history and culture and Ottoman studies. And so when you look at my whole career, the first third of it, I was dealing with the Greek-Turkish region, both in the field and in Washington, where I came back to be the Cyprus desk officer, and that was at the time of the Cyprus coup against Makarios and the Turkish military intervention. And then the second third of my career, I was doing Balkan work, both in the field and in Washington. And the final third, I was doing Arab-Israeli issues, Middle Eastern issues. And then I was ambassador in Algeria. And when you look at all of these issues, they were the unresolved political, ethnic, and nationality issues arising from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, what we're dealing with in Palestine today, what we're dealing with in Syria, in Egypt, these are all functions of unresolved issues from rising from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. So it was an totally unintended thread of symmetry throughout my career, but it was a very real one.
That's great. And what other countries did you all live in?
Well, we were posted in Turkey, in Cyprus, in Yugoslavia, in Portugal, in Israel, in Algeria, and then in retirement I was the chargé interim ambassador in Saudi Arabia,
And other times we were back here because we felt the children needed to know that this was their house and they had friends and the relatives, and that was important to us.
That's great.
So most Foreign Service people don't come back between posts, but we did.
And you lived in all those countries. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what was your favorite?
Hard to say, and for different reasons. Turkey was wonderful. I mean, we had a great group of friends, and we were just going out to see archaeological ruins or picking wildflowers and picnicking and these beautiful spots without children. And we were the ones who got to do drive down and see those prisoners. So we'd make brownies and get all the magazines and go and visit the prisoners and whatever. And
this
during
was
the
a
hashish
period
time
of drugs, and we had
It
imprisoned
hasn't
Americans
changed.
in trials. And since I was the only one who really spoke fluent Turkish, I was assigned to do this. And so we had the people always had the good sense to get arrested along the Mediterranean coast. So we had wonderful trips that were paid for by the U.S. government.
Right, we shouldn't
along the Turkish
tell
Mediterranean coast. Yeah, we did our work.
Yeah.
But you also had fun.
There was no law against having fun.
Yes.
Yeah, and what was the question?
No. I was just wondering what some of your favorite experiences were.
Okay. Well, anyway, Turkey for those experiences. Just, really getting to know the country very well. And Portugal for family was absolutely fabulous. Our kids had a lot of freedom, and they were, we went when our son was 3 and 3rd grade, and Sarah was going into 6th grade, and stayed there 4 years. So it was really a fabulous, fabulous experience. Israel, because of what we learned, and just, the tension of it all, and we had tons of visitors. And
I had
just
a fascinating job.
He had a fascinating job with a lot of different presidents of the country and a great ambassador. And anyway, so Israel was really very fascinating and really
The ambassador
huge
at the time was Martin Indyk, who is now the
experience.
special envoy doing the peace negotiations. But
he's a brilliant
when we were
student.
there in the mid-'90s, he was very active as well. And the peace process was quite active.
Clinton
The Oslo
days, yeah.
I and Oslo II agreements. And he was seeing the prime minister at a minimum of once a week, very often twice a week, sometimes even 3 times a week. And I went to, as the political counselor, virtually all his meetings with the prime minister, which were usually just, the prime minister and Martin and myself. So it was like a ringside seat on history, because this was at a time when Oslo II had just been concluded. You had had Rabin assassinated. You had the implementation of the Oslo Accords, in other words, the Israeli withdrawal from all the major cities in the West Bank. You had the historic Palestinian national elections, and then you had the breakout of the first serial suicide bombings, which totally changed the political climate there and changed dramatically, unfortunately, support for peace, and therefore undermined Paris's chance of winning elections that were called. And that's when Netanyahu came into power and basically put an end to the peace process then, and led to a gradual unraveling of things.
Wow, fascinating times.
And then Algeria just was tops. I mean, as ambassador, you're just open to many different things, and the country itself was opening up to the West, and everybody who came to our house the first few months we were there kept saying, we never would have come last year or the year before because it was just too dangerous to, one, be affiliated with you all, but to come out at night and do all of this, and it just really changed.
They were emerging from a decade of terrorism.
Really changed when we were there. So we just had a fabulous experience with wonderful Algerian friends, with an interesting staff of Algerians, and it was a very, very positive experience. So those are the 4 countries that we really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's great. It's like the king of Thailand's coming. We're having him over for dinner.
Right, exactly.
Well, great. And now, after all those amazing experiences in life and career, what advice might you have for a current SAIS student today, from both of your perspectives?
Well, I should say I'm not really finished. While I'm retired,
Please.
In retirement, I've been asked to do various troubleshooting assignments. Well, when I retired, I taught at Princeton at the Woodrow Wilson School for a year as a diplomat in residence, and then I went to the private sector. But then I started getting asked to come back and take special assignments. So every year since 2008, we spend the last 4 months of the year in New York, where I'm serving as the U.S. Senior Advisor for the Middle East to our mission at the UN for the period of the General Assembly.
Wow.
Because our mission is structured really to deal with the Security Council. But in the General Assembly every fall, there are some 250 to 300 resolutions, but unlike the Security Council, we don't have a veto, and we only get 1 vote. So we need more lobbying strength, so they ask former ambassadors to come, 1 for each region, and my region is the Middle East. So I've been dealing with all the Arab ambassadors in New York since then. But then also...
So you're not really retired.
I've been taking these other, when they come by, troubleshooting assignments. So I went to Saudi Arabia for almost 4.5 months, something like that, as the interim ambassador chargé, and that was for Obama's first visit there, which was an add-on to his Cairo visit. And then they realized they didn't have an ambassador on the ground because it was so new. The Bush appointee had left, and then because it's usually a political appointee, and the Obama administration was so new, they hadn't even named anybody. So I went, and the idea was to stay until just before a new one could arrive, which is what we did, and that was a great experience. And then in 2012, I was asked to be the acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs, where Egypt was so hot. The vacancy had opened up because the previous Deputy Assistant Secretary went to be our ambassador in Tunisia. And they wanted someone who could move right in because Egypt was so so much in the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
This is when they were having elections. Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood guy, came in, and of course he had a record of having been at least rhetorically opposed to the Camp David Accord. So we were trying to chart out a strategy which could preserve our interests, security and peace in the region, and get his cooperation. So.
And what would you recommend for SAIS students?
What would I recommend for several hours?
Yeah. Or is there more you'd like to add too?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah. What I would recommend for SAIS students, for any students at any university, take advantage of the opportunity fully while you're there. Don't goof off. Don't spend your time drinking and partying. There's time for everything. But it's such a great opportunity to build up your intellectual capital, to read widely, to look into new areas. Attend lectures, discussions.
That's great.
Don't blow it. The opportunity, because
once
you start working, you don't have the time.
Being in Washington is such an advantage for SAIS students. Just opens up their whole.
Oh yeah.
And just the newspapers alone. I mean, obviously the Times, but the Post too. Just
and even being in SAIS, there's many things going on every day. It's like the president of Kosovo's here,
exactly.
So and so,
exactly.
whatever, this seminar, and it's like you almost feel like you're on overload.
Right, we're on that list.
You want to do everything.
Lectures.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
and it's fantastic.
Yeah, what else would you add in terms of advice?
I'd probably go along with what Dick is saying. Just take advantage of SAIS and of the people and of Washington. That would just be my...
Terrific.
And enjoy.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciated hearing your life stories.
You're welcome.
So glad you're a part of SAIS.
So are we.